right, man. Welcome everyone to Satsang this fine Thursday. I actually remembered the date. It's the 12th. Usually I just say a fine Thursday because I can't remember the date number, but today I got it down. So we'll have fun. We're gonna have a fun time today. We're doing a little piece. Hi Tim, welcome.
Hey,
And we're doing a little piece. It's chapter 23. I'm gonna and there's actually some when we move over to Ramesh, et cetera, there's some fun pieces that I think you guys will actually enjoy. Um, so we'll go that way. But chapter 23, and I am that discrimination leads to detachment. So um, what's really fascinating is we start to talk about Nisargadatta's world and everybody else's world. So this is how he starts. He says, "You're all drenched, for it is raining hard." Um, he said, "But in my world, it's always fine weather. There is no night or day, no heat, no cold. No worries beset me. There are no regrets. My mind is free of thoughts, and there are no desires to slave for." So the questioner comes in and says, "Well, are there two worlds?" And he never answers that question directly because you always end up with the answer yes and no. So um, so he says, your world is transient, changeful. My world is perfect, changeless. You can tell me what you like about your world, and I shall listen carefully, even with interest. Yet not for a moment that will I forget that your world is not, that you are dreaming. So is there two worlds? Well, if one of them you're dreaming, I guess it's hard to say that other than in the dream that world even is. He goes, "What distinguishes your world from mine?" Wonderful answer here. He says, "My world has no characteristics by which it can be identified. You can say nothing about it. I am my world. My world is myself. It is complete and perfect. Every impression is erased, every experience rejected. I need nothing, not even myself. For myself, I cannot lose." Now, there's an old story. I don't know if you guys have heard this before. It was one that Ramesh used to enjoy telling, and so I'm gonna share that with you because it fits in with this little piece that he just said. In the days of a small kingdom, there was a occasion for a celebration. The king and the ministers and all the important people were supposed to get together. So all the people there had been shown their places according to the hierarchy. There was a throne for the king. The chief minister was waiting for the king to arrive and the ceremony to begin. Suddenly in walks a Sufi mystic. You have a problem right away, dressed in ragged clothes. He walks straight to the throne and sits down, to the horror of the chief minister. Um, the minister says, "What do you think you're doing?" And the Sufi says, "I'm just sitting here." Um, so the minister says, "Well, you aren't even the chief minister because I am the chief minister." And the Sufi says, "Well, I'm more than the chief minister." So the Sufi said to him, "Well, um, are you the king?" The Sufi replied, "No, I'm not the king. I'm more than that." "Are you the emperor?" The Sufi said, "No, I'm not the emperor. I'm more than that." Finally, he says, "Are you the prophet?" He says, "No, I'm not the prophet. I'm more than that." Finally, exasperated, the chief minister said, "Are you God?" And he said, "No, I'm not God. I'm more than that." And the minister said, "But more than that is absolutely nothing." And the Sufi said, "You're right. I am that nothing." And whenever we would get to this little point where he would say, "What is your world?" Maharaj is saying, "I am that nothing." Right? That's exactly what he's saying in this thing. So he goes on to say, "What distinguishes your world from mine?" Well, here it is. My world has no characteristics by which it can be identified. You can say nothing about it. I am my world. My world is myself. It's complete and perfect. Every impression is erased, every experience rejected. I need nothing even for myself, for I cannot lose. I am that nothing. Not even God. He said, all these ideas and distinctions exist in your world. In mine, there is nothing of the kind. The world is single and very simple. Nothing happens there. Whatever happens in your world only there has validity and evokes response. In my world, nothing happens. I am that nothing. The very fact of your experiencing your own world implies duality inherent in all experience. And Maharaj is a really great answer. Verbally, yes, but your words do not reach me. Mine is a nonverbal world. Right? In your world, the unspoken has no existence. In mine, the words and their contacts have no being. In your world, nothing stays. In mine, nothing changes. My world is real while yours is made of dreams. So it's really interesting because the um, different folks that take the Advaitin or non-dualistic position really differ in terms of how they approach everything. And probably the most extreme, if you will, in a certain way, was Ramana Maharshi, because at the age of 13, he was sitting in a cave and people would simply go and sit with him. And there were no words and there were no pointers. All there was a 13-year-old young man sitting in a cave, and people came to sit with this young man. And it is kind of interesting because that's what Maharaj, verbally yes, but mine is a nonverbal world. So ultimately, now that's a pretty tough magnetization. I'm not sure you would see quite today what you saw in that day because the verbal uh, context, if you will, is very, very present in our world, especially with information and all of the things that, we live in. But in those days, this would have been in the early 1900s, um, that wasn't as present. And so there was more of an understanding of pure silence from the beginning. So understand, that you see that. It is interesting just to note, by the way, that Ramana, um, uh, there were just very few. He didn't. There was one little thing he wrote. It's a book about this thick. I called "I Am That," and so even in his, and I mean, he had his ashram in Arunachala and all of the rest of it, but he just wasn't prone to generating a lot of words, book or otherwise. There's some people that wrote about their experiences with him. So there's a book like that, a couple of books like that, people that lived in the ashram. But when you go look up, if you want to find and read, it's not like getting "I Am That" from Nisargadatta. Ramana was just not a man of words, and that was his teaching. Um,
And yet, if you look at his picture, it speaks volumes.
it really does, and as I say, that's a different context than you find, I think, really today. The and I actually think that's why not you see the Advaita or non-duality has become so popular because it is the intellectual path. So there are plenty of those who have spoken a lot. So that makes that available. The problem you get into, of course, is what you see, what I always talk about, which is the um, how many angels are on the head of a pin kinds of conversations that we have in non-duality. So so to me, the key is non-duality. Is it a life path? If it's a life path, that means something much different than if it's an exchange in verbal definitions, so a parsing. And so that's a distinction, I think. Just watch for it, you'll see it. Um, and I often think that a lot of those folks that get engaged in that, um, that's where they go naturally because they're so used to parsing that their conditioning has them go there. And I actually do think a lot of those folks have a sincere driver towards awakening, but living a path just isn't something that's in the conditioning. So notice that because I mean, Nisargadatta is all about. You can tell when you read him, it's all about how is your life happening? How is that? How is it on the ground? That's always the driver. And I think the driver for seekers, um, has traditionally been that driver, but that's actually, you'll see the shift in that. That's shifting in today's world because of the um, just the way it's put together. So here we go. The questioner comes back to Maharaj. He says, "Yet we are talking." He says, "The talk is in your world. In mine, there is eternal silence. My silence sings, my emptiness is full. I lack nothing. You cannot know my world until you are there. It seems you're alone in your world, right? Now you know what's going to happen here. How can you say alone or not alone when words do not apply? Of course, I am alone, for I am all. So in that sense, I'm alone, right? And actually, you're with me alone, for I am all. Um, he says, "Do you ever come into our world? What is coming? What is coming and going to me? Those again are words. I am. Whence am I to come from, and where to go?" Right. So to me, when you work through what we just worked through, that kind of a little bit, I think that's just notice, get comfortable with the way that language is, and that the speaking is coming from um, a, an egoless place, if you will. There is no definition there. When he says there's no definition, no egos, no stories, no anything. And that's why it's called discrimination leads to detachment. So he's going to give him the first step, right? The that's when the discrimination actually does matter, because it starts in the world of duality. Discrimination leads to detachment, leads to, right? That's where he's headed. He said, "You should consider more closely your own world." This is Maharaj. "Examine it critically, and suddenly you will find, one day you will find yourself in mine." Okay, here's the next great question. What do we gain by it? All right. Now, I remember in the beginning there that really is there. I remember I got to India, and I sat down, and they were like, "Well, what are you here for?" And I remember saying, "Well, because I was new to the scene, but it was very clear to me that anything I did was looking for an outcome or a result. That was just always a clear piece of how my life was lived." So I said, "Well, I don't know a lot about it, but you guys are talking about enlightenment, and I'm thinking that's what I'm here for." Because I had surmised that, that was the goal, and knowing that there was internal misery that was driving this whole thing, of course, that seemed to be the solution for internal misery was enlightenment. So that was, and I think I must have had a wider frame, because it was enlightenment, and anything like enlightenment would work for me, because that was where I was in my seeking at the time. So what do we gain by it? You gain nothing. You leave behind what is not your own, and you find what you have never lost, your own being. Who is the ruler of your world? Again, there are no rulers and ruled here. There is no duality whatsoever. You are merely projecting your own ideas. Your scriptures and your gods have no meaning here. Still, you have a name, shape, display consciousness, and activity. In your world I appear so, says Maharaj. In mine I have being only, nothing else. You people are rich with ideas of possession, of quantity and quality. I am completely without ideas. Right? So get comfortable with how this is. He again and again and again. He calls these the hammer blows, right? The hammer blows of awakening. So he goes out. He goes back to it again and again and again. And that's actually what separates knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge always needs something new to add to the already existing body of knowledge. Wisdom needs nothing new, because at every experiential level, all the way through, it carries a different impact. So the hammer blows, while they feel and look the same when we read them, we go, "Oh yeah, he said that before. Oh yeah, he said that 5 times in the last page," right? In wisdom, content, a body of knowledge, or a body of anything, really isn't important at all. I mean, in the end, you can see I am that nothing. right? He said, so he goes on. Then he says, in my world, there is disturbance, distress, and despair. You seem to be living on some hidden income while I'm a slave for a living. So he says, well, do as you please. You're free to leave your world for mine. That's Maharaj. How is the crossing done? Okay. So here we go. See your world as it is, not as you imagine it to be. Discrimination will lead to detachment. Detachment will ensure right action. Right action will build an inner bridge to your real being. So he builds it right there. Action is a proof of earnestness. Do what you are told diligently and faithfully, and all obstacles will dissolve. So notice that it's an interesting thing. We talk about action, but at the same time, we say, wait a minute, there is no action, right? You're simply being lived into every moment. So just get used to that piece, because when you talk about earnestness, it's what you see happening and you go, oh, that's earnest. To the normal person, they would say, I am doing that, right? But in the awakening path, one is simply being lived. So that takes something away from action, if you will. So don't get wrapped up in the action. In fact, we're in the at the end, we're going to talk about that, because there's a really funny little piece in that Ramesh does with the satsang. He says, "Are you happy?" Maharaj says, "In your world, I would be most miserable to wake up, to eat, to talk, to sleep again. What a bother." So you do not even want to live, even. He says to live, to die, what meaningless words those are. When you see me alive, I am dead. When you think me dead, I am alive. How muddled up are you? Right? So he says, how indifferent you are. All the sorrows of the world are as nothing to you. He says, I am conscious of your troubles. Then what are you going to do about them? There is nothing I need do. They come and go. Do they go by the very act of you giving them your attention? Yes. The difficulty may be physical, emotional, or mental, but it is always individual, right? That's the sorrows are individual. Large-scale calamities are the sum of numberless individual destinies and take time to settle. But death is never a calamity, right? So he's done away with that, right? So, and it's really interesting just to, just to watch this, um, because we always think that Nisargadatta was not so patient. And yet with Ramesh, right, he was this kind of banker that had this very flat presence. And he always looked to all the world to be the most patient person in the world. But you notice that a lot of people go on and on and on and on with Nisargadatta, and somehow he takes it in, takes it in, takes it in. A lot of patience. He says, you say the world is no use to us, only a tribulation. I feel it cannot be so. Here he goes. God is not such a fool. This is the questioner. The world seems to me to be a big enterprise for bringing the potential into the actual, matter into life, the unconsciousness into full awareness. To realize the supreme, we need the experience of opposites. Just for the building of a temple, we need stone and mortar, wheat and iron, glass and tiles. So for making a man a divine sage, a master of life and death, one needs the material of every experience, right? Completely different doctrine. As a woman goes to the market, buys provisions of every sort, comes home, cooks, bakes, and feeds her Lord. So we bake ourselves nicely in the fire of life and we feed our God. Maharaj says, well, if you think so, act on it. Feed your God by all means. Questioner, a child goes to school, learns many things, which will be of no use to it later. But in the course of learning, it grows. So do we pass through experiences without number and forget them all. But in the meantime, we grow all the time. And what is a Yanni but a man with a genius for reality? The world of mind cannot be accidental. It makes sense. There must be a plan behind it. My God has a plan. To which Maharaj says, if the world is false, then the plan and its creator are also false. Uh, Now, the reason I brought Ramesh in is because in one of my, it's probably something not well known, but I grew up in a Mexican village and then spent time in Peru later, so I'm very fluent in Spanish and did a lot of merger. My career centered around the fact that I spoke Spanish. So Ramesh knew that fact, and so one day in Ramesh's place, you would go up into his little area, and there was a little room, and it probably held, gosh, I don't think you could get more than 10 people in that room. And you always knew who were the new people because there was a fellow out front on the street, and he'd figure out who the new people were, put them in the front of the line, and they would go into the room because the first time you always went into the room. And if they put a microphone on you, then you know you were one of the first ones that he was going to talk to. Nobody realized that except for those of us that had been around. There was a hole in the room, they'd cut in, and that way they could record everything. And then outside was this huge front room, and we all sat in there. And I would go in, and I like to sit in the corner in this kind of rocking thing that you would find out in a garden. It was kind of a swinging thing, and so I would just sit there with my eyes shut and listen to Satsang when I would go, and usually later he and I would have tea or whatever we would do. So one day I was sitting there and I heard this really gruff voice, and it was a man, and he was speaking Spanish. And if you know much about that, this particular man was from Buenos Aires, and he's what they call a porteño, and those are the fellows from the ports. And if there is a garbled style of Spanish that one has incredible difficulty in understanding, a porteño is the one that will deliver that somewhat the best. Cubans are very good at it as well, I might add. But certainly the porteños from Argentina are right there. And he had come to tell Ramesh that he had this message from God. That was what he was there to do. And so all of a sudden I hear my name, and I kind of jerk out of my trance, and I hear Ramesh saying, "Hey, could you come in here?" Now, what Ramesh wanted me to do was translate. So I'd spent my entire life translating, but one thing I had not translated was between a Porteño and English with an Indian accent on the subject of Advaita. That just wasn't probably in my sweet spot of translation, you know. But nonetheless, I undertook that. And as he began to deliver this message, Ramesh stopped him immediately and he said, "Look," he says, "I understand you have a message and I understand you think it's incredibly important." He says, "But this is a gathering and it's centered around my concepts." And I remember he used that word "my" in a very clear way because I think he wanted to communicate with him. There's probably a more elegant way to say that, and he would have used it knowing him, but that's not what he did. And and he said, "So here's my advice. If you think this message is so important," he says, "you should go start a gathering like this and have people come and they can listen to how it is that you see that your concepts are." He says, "But while we're here, we're going to do it this particular way." And then that ended the conversation. The Porteño very kindly, said fine, and that was the end of that little interchange. And I always remembered that because I sit and I read, I read and I absorb what Nisargadatta is doing, and he is with a lot of these questioners for a lot longer. I mean, I don't think there was a paragraph before Ramesh was like, "Time out." He was just not he was not going to go there. And so notice that we often talk about Nisargadatta as not being all of that patient, and yet when he's teaching, incredible patience, right? So so here we go. Maharaj says, if the world is false, then the plan and its creator are also false. Questioner, again, you deny the world. There is no bridge between us. Maharaj, there is no need for a bridge. Your mistake lies in your belief that you are born. You were never born, nor will you ever die. But you believe that you were born at a certain date and place, and that a particular body is your own. Questioner, the world is, I am, these are facts. Why do you worry about the world, says Maharaj, before taking care of yourself? You want to save the world, don't you? Can you save the world before saving yourself? Which is a common theme when he talks about it. No, we all want to go save the world. Um, but if you know that you're seeing your perception is completely skewed by the fact that there is an egoic slant to that seeing what is it that you are about saving, right? Because the context of what you're saving is going to be the same context in terms of how you see your own world, right? That's just simply going to be it. He says, and what is the meaning of being saved? Saved from what? From illusion? Salvation is to see the things as they really are. I really do not see myself related to anybody and anything, not even to self, whatever self may be. I remain forever undefined, right? Wordless, nonverbal, wordless, not defined. I am that nothing. You get the theme, you get this amazing theme out of here. He says, how did you come to it? And he says, by my trust in my guru. He says, you alone are, and I did not doubt him. I was merely puzzling over it until I realized that that is absolutely true. Right? So there's that piece. Well, now let's take the next step. I'm going to move over into Ramesh's piece, which is there is no perceiver, only perceiving. Now this is gonna get fun, and you'll see why. Um, One morning, when a visitor began his question with the usual, I want to know, Maharaj began to laugh, and without waiting for the Marathi translation, because that's what he spoke, uh, interrupted with the counter question in English. I who? Right. Then, having enjoyed the huge joke hugely, he went back to his native Marathi and said, it is really so very simple. This is that I'm trying to convey to you. You too will find it so if you could only keep me inside when you listen. If you would only remember that so long as there is a supposed autonomous entity volitionally trying to understand what I am saying, true understanding is out of the question. So now he's coming at it from a little bit of a different place. And the first time he was talking to that person and trying to unwind the I by saying, have the I do this. Now he's speaking directly and saying, as long as you think there is an I, understanding will not occur. Same message, little different approach. He says apprehension of a metaphysical revelation presupposes an inquiring, open, vacant mind in which such apprehension could enter. Any independent entity indicates a conditioned mind, full of concepts resisting the entry of anything I say and I want to impart. Do I make myself clear, I wonder? Now remember, he was talking about saving, you want to save the world. Remember, it's the same uh, autonomous entity, this autonomous entity, which indicates a conditioned mind full of concepts resisting energy of anything. What could that mind save? Except attempt to save a lot of other minds like it, right? Even though I use the words and you hear them, the imparting will only be possible if the subject and object merge in the hearing of it. Okay? Begin at the beginning and examine whether there exists any one to either to talk or to listen, or if there's merely a functioning, talking, listening, apprehending, and experiencing. Right? I really like that because a lot of times when there is that move from I am the experiencer to I am the experiencing, right? The step over is can be a little tortured. This is really simple. He says, begin at the beginning and examine whether there exists one either to talk or to listen, or there's merely a functioning. So he steps right into it. It's a beautiful move. When you think of something existing, you think only in terms of something that is objective with form. You're concerned only with objective phenomena, whereas I see all objects, including you, as nothing more or less than appearances in consciousness, and therefore is not existing. Right? Appearances in consciousness simply don't exist. So that's much like the ego, right? That's why we use the term a lot of times story. When you use the term story, you're indicating, pointing to the fact that it doesn't have an independent existence. Stories have no independent existence. Anything verbal has no independent existence, right? So when somebody says, when you hear the term "it's not real," simply remember, in the West, real to us is like, does it have tangibility? That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about real in the sense that it was before and will be after. In other words, it always is. That's reality in this particular sense. He said, let us come back to the visitor who wanted to ask a question a little while ago. He has come here perhaps with some inconvenience and not inconsiderable expense to seek the kind of knowledge that would enable him to turn himself into a better individual, a sage, a yoni, right? Like what did I want? I wanted to be, I think you guys call it enlightenment. I want that, right? Just like I was picking it off of the lunchroom shelf, right? Now, do you understand why I could not help laughing? Not at him, please, but at the tricks that Maya plays through her illusions. Think for a moment. Who is thinking in terms of transformation, changing from one state to the other, to another, in terms of self-improvement? And we're going to do some self-improvement stuff here in a second, right? Surely it is nothing other than an appearance in consciousness, a character in a movie, an individual in a dream pseudo-entity considering itself subject to the workings of karma. How could such a dreamed character perfect itself into anything other than its dreamed self? How could a shadow perfect itself into substance? How could there ever be any awakening from the dream, except for the dreamer to resolve the true identity of the source of the dream and the manifestation? How could there ever be any awakening other than that? I remember that Ramesh used to use the concept. He liked the movie concept. And of course, growing up in Southern California, that was a pretty common kind of a thing. And he would always make the comment that the normal sleepwalking person who are in a movie, right? He said, act as though one of those characters would stop in the middle of the movie and say, "No, director, not that way, this way." And wait, I have a question. Now, he says, if any of you have ever seen a movie like that, he says, please let me know. He says, but all the movies I've seen, he said, go according to the script. And that's true of egoic life as well. It goes according to the script, right? An awakening consists in apprehending that there is no individual perceiver of the phenomenal world, but that the essential nature and purpose of all phenomena is merely the perceiving of phenomena, that is, functioning in this here and now, apprehending that every sentient being, I, as the potential source of all experience, experiences the apparent universe objectively through a psychosomatic apparatus. The very first step in understanding what this is all about is to give up the concept of an active volitional I as a separate entity and accepting the passive role of perceiving and functioning as a process. Right? So it's always about zeroing in on that piece. Right? Uh, this morning, Ron sent over a beautiful piece. He and I were talking the other day, and this beautiful piece was talking, in essence, about time and here and now, and how everything in time, right, the past and the future, are both mental extensions because they're never here and now, right? And the only self that is that which is the experiencing of here and now, right? So that immediately tells you the rest is mental. All of these are simple pointers to get you right back to where he is here. All right, so here's the fun part, guys. I promised it. Here it comes. It's the only, in fact, it's the only place I know that this happens. So here Maharaj goes, and for those who says he has no sense of humor, let me gladden your hearts by giving you a couple of tips, right? In spite of what I say, I know you'll continue on your self-improvement course and keep looking for tips. So open your notebooks and write them down. Are you ready? He gets two tips. He actually does. It's hilarious. He says, make it a habit to think and speak in the passive tense. All right. Instead of I see something, I hear something, why not think in the passive way? Something is seen or something is heard. The prescription will then be not on the basis of an action by a phenomenal entity, but on the basis of an event or an occurrence. See the shift he's after there? Right? In due course, the pseudo entity I will recede into the background. Now, there came a time, Michael, who's not showing himself today, he actually had a fall. I think I told he was following in my example, I guess. But um, when we were together in Los Angeles years ago, he said, "Hey, I noticed that you keep using these particular things. If you pointers, have you ever gathered them up?" And me being the spontaneous style that I am, I said, "No." So Michael actually created a little Facebook page, and all of the people that we had a business, and this business was pretty unique because you could just simply come into the room and Satsang would occur. If you walked into the room, part of our business was you sat down and we did that, and then we would do the business. It happened very nicely. And so everybody who was engaging with me got on there and they started to basically entitle the pointers that I was using. And so all of a sudden I had this whole list of my own pointers. It was pretty cool. Well, one of the ones that I had, I called linguistic imprinting. You've probably heard me mention it before, but it was just I noticed that in the way that we all deal with each other, object to subject, that subject to object actually, that our very language imprinted the sense of autonomous doership. Because I would say I and you. So everything got framed in I and you, right? And so to me, there was a period of time. Now it met with some interesting responses in the business world, but there was a period of time where I would render everything into this kind of a passive state, right? And that just became something that was happening inside. Now, we'll get back to it. Don't take these tips and make them something, right? It's the same way they talk about meditation. Meditation's a wonderful thing if it's the natural arising. And it's a wonderful device and has an incredible reason for existing. But the point is that that is a really nice tip, and it does do as he says when the speaking is from a passive space and not I and you. It causes one to go, how would that be said? Now notice I just did it, right? Instead of saying, how would I say that? How would that be said? Right? There's a passive version right there, right? And in just simply working with that, that was a discrimination. You could discriminate from how it would be said if the I owned it versus how it would be said if it was simply unowned, right? So and I found that to be very, very helpful for me. Now, I will say this: when I was in meetings, in business meetings and the like, and I would say something, I got a lot of response during that period of time that I was speaking in a very weird and strange way because in the business world, as those of you who have been there know, it's a very assertive world and it's very I-based, right? And it cuts through the crowd. That's its very essence. And all of a sudden, you have this fellow who's rendering everything in this kind of very soft way, right? And it wasn't necessarily well received. All right, you ready for tip number two? Here we go. Before going to sleep at night, spend about 10 minutes sitting relaxed, both in body and mind, taking your stand that you are not the body-mind construct, but the animating consciousness, so that this idea will impregnate your being throughout the period of your sleep. Right? So those are the two tips he gives. Right? Now it's interesting. Ramesh had one kind of thing like this that he used to ask us to do, and you guys, I think you all have heard that. And he would say, you know, take about 25 minutes, find the thing that you are the most responsible that happened during the day. Right? Whatever that thing is, find what it is. He said, and then takes the next 25 minutes and go through and figure out all of the things that had to be present for that uh, occurrence to have arisen. And that's very similar to this, I'm not the body, I'm the animating conscious. It's another way to get to exactly the same thing. But it was the same thing. Do it at night, do it before you go to sleep. He was trying to, in essence, let the mind build a case that all of the things that were outside my control that needed to be there for the thing I think is in my control, right? It was just impossible to build a case that you were the autonomous doer of anything. It simply, it simply wasn't the case. And what allowed autonomous doing to even be something we think we are was to eliminate all of that, which you are not in control of, from the story that you told yourself. Right. So you'll see, if you want to see someone do that, and the most impressive version of that is in today's politics, because the stories are built without regard to pretty much anything other than whatever the story itself needs to be about, and it needs to be about how powerful somebody is who actually is doing nothing. Now we probably all would agree that politicians are the definition of doing nothing. So they fit right into this particular Advaitic piece. So I'm sorry,
Could I
I detoured there.
could I add something?
Go ahead. Go
It
ahead.
was a little more appropriate to what you were saying slightly earlier. So it's not, but I wanted to hear what you had to say until you
No,
kind of
jump
took a
in.
breath.
Jump in. I'm
I
sorry. I
love the
probably
idea.
Hmm?
One of the things that I like about uh, taking the stand that you're not the body mind, but the animating consciousness. Um, Over the years, it has a particular feel to it when that's happening, you
That's
know.
correct.
And when you have that particular feel, um, the so-called individual kind of just vaporizes away while that has its presence, and it has a dominating influence. And I like that. In fact, you said something like that a couple of satsangs ago, and it was with very similar wording. I went, you know what? That's a real key for me because it instigates the witnessing from the feel that thing is, you know. And if you got that instigating the feeling and the witnessing, and it's a cycle that builds on itself. It's very friggin' cool, you know.
And eventually witnessing becomes installed.
It becomes
Right?
what?
Becomes installed.
Oh yeah,
So
exactly.
that so now it's an ever-present activity, right? It's the
Yeah.
and of course it happens, it's one of those that happens by itself. Right. So that's the installation. And in the beginning, what happens is there's a little there's a kind of a herky jerkiness to it, because you may have 10 minutes or 10 hours or whatever where
Right.
the
Yeah.
witnessing is really rocking, right? And then it quits, right? And then what's the first thing? Oh
I want
shit,
it back. Yeah.
oh shit, what did I do? Right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so
I love that.
for it simply to be seen that the witnessing is still there and available, it just simply isn't. It's not within the perceiving in the moment.
Yeah. The attention was
That's
distracted in a way.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That's the place to go, rather than the I don't know. So I'm gonna read one little piece out of Explorations here, because I wanted I and sometimes these seem like paradoxes, right? Because he's given a couple of tips, right? And you kind of know what the stance on that is anyway. But I think in a certain way, you always need to remind yourself because what you don't want to do is make one of these tips the thing that you do as a consistent thing, because typically that gets egoically um, what owned, if you will, right? So it's just something to think about. He says many of Maharaj's visitors have found it almost impossible to accept his definite view that no personal individual effort was necessary for achieving enlightenment, right? They would try in many ways to get to him to give them advice on what they should do. In doing so, however, they would show that they had not really truly understood the basic point in Maharaj's teaching, wanting the personal and individual attainment for enlightenment and wanting to make a personal and individual effort is wholly incompatible with the essence of enlightenment, which is the annihilation of the ego, the me notion. It is for this reason that Maharaj asked the people to eschew, how do you say that word? Eschew? The desire to understand,
It's eschew.
eschew, thank you.
Yeah.
It's not a word I use often. Um, the desire to understand what he called the intellectual level, because such understanding clearly indicated an individual me who would want to understand it. So understand, that's the thing we were talking about earlier when I said that wisdom, right? You can hear the same thing, and wisdom sorts it out for you. So when you look at the tips, you can say, "Oh, these are really amazing things." And if consciousness wants to live me in such a way that those tips are something that occur when they occur, then that's an amazing thing, right? As opposed to the get your notebooks out and write this down because I have some self-improvement tips for you, which is how he presented it, which I found incredibly humorous, right? But remember, in the we're clearly to the point where we understand, in the understanding and in the work that we've done so far, there simply isn't an individual doer, right? And so the autonomous doer isn't there, so everything needs to be contexted from that point on, right? That's just simply, you do yourself a favor. So even Ramesh's go home and look at the most important same thing. If that's something that occurs, do it, right? But just remember, you're not an autonomous doer, so it's not your occurring, right? That's not why that's happening.
So
And
that's like
go ahead.
when Nisargadatta would be asked, why do you do these rituals?
Mm-hmm.
You know, why do you smoke those cigarettes?
Yep.
It's just that was the character just doing its thing,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah. It's always funny because the thing, it's like, as people who know me know very well, I love street food, right? So of course, as I've lived along in my life, it's been, gosh, you're overweight, or that. I mean, all of the stuff, and I grew up, I was poor, grew up in a Mexican village, so guess what? Folks like that, we all eat street food. That's what we live on. So to this day, every Tuesday there's a Pancho's truck in town, right? And I go into that truck and I get my whatever version. The fellows from Guanajuato makes the most wonderful Mexican food you can imagine, and that's a happening that happens, right? So for everyone, and if you've ever been, have you been in India, Diane?
No,
Yeah, so if you ever do, Maharaj is not the only one that smokes beedies, I'm here to tell you. Uh,
right.
that is a very, very big deal there. So you will be exposed to beedi smoking. That will be part of what happens if you're ever in India. It's as common, in fact, it's probably more common than street food in our little world, so to speak. But yes, the body mind lives like the body mind, and you
Yeah,
see, go
at
ahead.
this point, Diane wanted to be in India with George Harrison
Yeah,
back in the day.
yeah.
Absolutely. That's where she wanted to be, you know? Um, now I, It's not anything that I look forward to doing. If it happens, it'd be great.
Yeah,
But
I know you know what I
it's
mean, though.
not.
I'm just here to tell you that,
Yeah.
when you talk about that particular habit, I mean, it's ubiquitous
But I
already.
mean, he said, well, it just happens to be something that this likes to do. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yep. Yeah. And like I say, and in today, you can imagine in today's, when you're working with a lot of the kinds of things that you and I are working with here in today's world, the whole vegan thing. And here you're talking about some dude who just, slammed down some chili verde tacos, cheesy tacos last night, or the night before. So, it just ends up that's what that is, right? So that's a different version than what you see in the spiritual movements of today, because there's what they call virtue signaling, I guess is the term, but it's how you in essence mark yourself as metaphysically aware or something along. I don't know if that's the term we would use, but nonetheless, right?
It's
And this is
just
a
another form of dogma.
yeah,
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 that's egotistical enough for our purpose, buddy. Yeah, works
yeah.
perfectly.
You know what I'm saying? I mean,
Yeah.
so to me, you find people from different parts of the country, and you notice that, hey, they grew up a certain way, and that particular body mind kind of rolls that way. Right. So I love to go to the South because, street food includes um, barbecue. Right. So guess what? My brothers in the South, they're rocking the barbecue. So anyway, um, that's just a happening. It means nothing. It really does. It has no meaning particularly. Right.
Yeah, but looking at what responsibility you had for the thing you think you were most responsible for, it sort of reminds me of there's the Thich Nhat Hanh story of the flour, and the flour is made entirely of non-flour elements.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I used to love that that story of the Zen monastery in Tokyo, the big one, right? And all of the acolytes and aspirants go out in the morning, and I mean they're down on their hands and knees with these little rakes, and they're making that entire place perfect. I mean it's a Zen garden. It's the largest in the world to my understanding, and I mean they're making that thing absolutely perfect, right? And so when they're all done, the Zen master, head of the commune, comes out and goes through it all, right? And then the last thing he does is he throws in a Baby Ruth wrapper, right? Why? Because somebody who's
That's
going through
perfect.
that Zen garden and experience sees that, and it's the Zen stick, if you will.
Confronting.
Yeah. Yeah, and the Zen stick is a lot like what we're talking. It's like Nisargadatta smoking beaties. That's the Zen stick here. The Baby Ruth wrapper, the flour made of, everything made of everything that's not flour. Right.
Yep.
It's exactly that, and that is what, phenomenon is, and we spend all of our time trying to purify phenomenon as though it could be done. Categorize and purify, right? And the reality is life continues to live itself. Bees continue to get processed, uh, tacos on street trucks all over the world. I mean, it's like, you just this is just all part of the dance, and that's the dance that's not us. That it's a dance in which the body mind is participating, right? So I mean, you can imagine all of the people that grew up in Southern California in the 60s, and yeah, exactly. And someone will say, well, I still roll a fatty every night, and I'm like, works for me, right? Sounds like a California beanie to me, okay, because that would in the 60s that was a very habitual thing that would occur. And if that's the body mind's preference, then so be it. Nothing to do, simply what the body mind does. Now, if you're using that to try to make a point in some particular way, that's a different conversation. But um, that's something. So that's not a marker. That's not a marker of anything. What's the discrimination? Right? The discrimination is basically to create detachment, to see that I'm not the body mind, I am the animating essence, if you will, source, and that ultimately um, being pure awareness is the natural habitat and is me actually. And habitat's a bad way to put it. So if that's the natural discrimination, then everything that happens in the arising, of our manifestation is not us. That is the discrimination. All right, any questions? Comments? Go for it, Brad.
It's not, it's just kind of a what's going on in the midst of this, man. I'm finding that I'm really enjoying these more and more. And I'm also chuckling because so many things relate to stuff that, like, Nisargadatta's main thing was I just did what my guru told me to do for 3 years, and then it all happened, you know. And it's all about putting the attention on the animating force of the witness. And I love that because it has a certain feel to it. So when I'm not there, I go, wait a minute, I don't want to feel this. I want to feel that, you know, the other thing is always preferable. And you just find yourself doing it more because the payoff is worth it.
Yeah, and that's not you remembering, that
Of
is a
course.
remembering, right?
Yeah, it's
That's
just
the
coming
beauty.
through.
That's the
Yeah.
beauty. It's like, oh, cool.
Yeah.
Thanks, thanks, thanks for the wake up
Of
call.
course. Yeah.
Ron, the piece he sent me this morning, because he had described what he sent me this morning earlier, and in exactly the same way it was described in what he sent over. He says, honest, I didn't, and I just wrote back and I said, that's going to happen more and more. And it does. You'll read something out in the Sargadatta or whatever, and you're like, I just said that three
Did
minutes
you
ago.
ever have an experience kind of like this? It's really compact. I won't, waste so much of time with it. But there have been times when I was felt off track, and I could feel there's Brad doing his thing again.
Yep.
I
Absolutely.
Yep.
love that. Oh, hey, that's a wake up call.
No, but think about it though, the minute that you say that, you set yourself up for the witnessing, right?
Yeah,
Because whenever you refer to Brad
right,
as over there and not here,
right.
and Osho used to say that, it's a laboratory experiment. It's a laboratory experiment.
Yeah,
Don't be the subject of the experiment, be the scientist who's watching.
yeah,
That's how he
yeah,
was, same thing. So the minute you go, oh, there goes Alan again,
yeah.
right? Bang. That
And,
particular
and
person.
and you find humor in it too,
Oh yeah. Well,
and a lot of joy too,
if you have to, if the witnessing is of this body mind, it's packed in. Yeah, it's 24/7 humor.
Yeah, buddy.
So yeah, ask my wife. But the reality is certainly that that's a welcome thing when the body mind is giving, or I'm sorry, that reminder is arising within consciousness.
Yeah.
You know.
You know,
So that's
speaking of humor, what I've been noticing is that when when the noticing of the character happens for me, like even when it's a real foible, and so, that someone could consider it a foible, or in the past this would have been a foible here. I would laugh so much about it now. Like I was even just reading something the other day, and my cat was looking at me like I was crazy because I was just laughing so hard about how ridiculous this something was. It's not even important what it is. But I just find it now that this is known, I just think this, like, the whole world seems so funny. I don't know how to describe it. So
No, that's exactly right. It's exactly right. Like I say, I made a political comment earlier, and I watch here and there, and I'm just like, I find that to be a source of incredibly high comedy, right? Because there's a scene, there's a perceiving that when that's in effect renders all of that much more humorous. It just does. and of course, if you're curious about stories and the construction of stories and all, and that was a part of, my little journey. It was incredible pointers that came out of seeing the story. What do we do to make stories? What's happening internally? How that bites down and creates identification. No problem there. But it's exactly what you're saying. And the world is just full of hilarity. It really, really is. So, all right. All right. As Osho used to say, enough for today. All
I
right.
must say, thanks, Alan.
Namaste.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. This has been a wonderful thing. I'm really happy. As I said, you'll start to see me I'm using some new sources and things. I'll introduce those slowly. The Gene Dunn books, I haven't used those yet, etc. But you'll start to see some of that in play. It's wonderful to have you all here. It really is. It's a joy in my life to be able to do these on Thursdays.
So glad you're doing it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's so
Thanks,
much.
Alan. Have a great night, guys.
All right, much
Night.
love. See you guys next week.
Yeah.